Welcome back. The Supreme Court wrapped up a big week of rulings with the decision on the Defense of Marriage Act, but the court struck down the part banning federal benefits for same-sex spouses who were married in states where it's legal. But that's not all the court did. They also struck down a key part of the Voting Rights Act. So I guess you can say one for the conservatives and one for the liberals. Joining me now, as they do every week, are CNN contributor Maria Cardona and Amy Holmes, anchor of Real News on The Blaze. Also with us today, Mike Sachs from the Huffington Post. Good morning to you all.
Good morning, Allison.
Good morning. Mike, let me ask you this. Does this sound like there was, I don't know, some sort of political wheeling and dealing going on behind closed doors at the Supreme Court?
Well, political wheeling and dealing insofar as what decisions they handed out when. And I think the justices did not want to go out striking down the Voting Rights Act Section 4, which they did on Tuesday. So they went out instead striking down DOMA, perhaps making some people happy as opposed to creating the big public outcry that happened with striking down the Voting Rights Act.
Okay, Maria, let me ask you this. What is the political fallout of DOMA? You know, is this a huge victory for President Obama?
I actually think it's a huge victory for the American people, Allison, and for what our country actually stands for, equal rights and justice for all. I think at the heart of it, what the Supreme Court really did was understand that DOMA actually took away rights and privileges for 10% of the American population that others actually enjoyed. And so I think at the heart of it, they were absolutely right to do this. They put it in the hands of the states. This is progressing towards the point where our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters are going to enjoy the federal benefits that they deserve in all states. That's where it's going. So I think politically it was a win for not just our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, but for American values.
Amy, what do you think?
Well, I live down in the West Village, just a few blocks away from Stonewall, where many say the modern gay rights movement started. And I can tell you, in my neighborhood, there was great celebration, both on the day of DOMA and even last night, a huge gay pride event and parade that I was very happy to be right next door to. As far as, you know, whether or not conservatives or liberals are winning on this, a lot of conservatives actually saw the DOMA decision as being somewhat a conservative one. As Maria suggested, the Supreme Court said that marriage, the definition of marriage, should be sort of a federalist issue and in the hands of the state. And at least from my point of view, it makes perfect sense that if a state says that same-sex marriages are co-equal to opposite-sex marriages, so should the federal government and recognize that state's definition of marriage.
Okay, Amy, let me stick with you with my next question. Let's talk about the Voting Rights Act, because now states with a history of discriminatory voting procedures, they're off the hook. They no longer need permission from the federal government to make new changes to how they vote. First, listen to the president's take.
I might not be here as president had it not been for those who courageously helped to pass the Voting Rights Act. I think that the Supreme Court made a mistake in its ruling.
So, Amy, what do you think? In the end, is this a bigger decision than DOMA?
Well, I'm not sure that I would compare the two, although, of course, both decisions do have great social impact. States are not off the hook. That's a bit of an overstatement. In fact, voters can still sue if their state is using discriminatory practices, and that even includes disparate impact. So if minority voters are disparately impacted by voting rules in that state can be held liable. The Supreme Court said, though, that the formula that was being used to determine if these states were sort of racist in perpetuity needed to be updated to reflect more modern practices. They then punted it to Congress to try to come up with that formula. I certainly understand sort of the other side's frustration with that, because we know with this Congress they can't seem to get along. They can't get along to do very much.
Mike, you know, the decision on DOMA and on the Voting Rights Act each had, you know, basically the same dissenting opinion, you know, morality versus constitutionality. The court also seems to be kind of mirroring public opinion on a lot of these issues. Should they really be doing that?
Well, on race, I don't think the 5 conservative justices who struck down Voting Rights Act Section 4 were worried too much about public opinion. In fact, they were more worried about showing that they had given fair warning to Congress to fix the Voting Rights Act as they saw it to be deficient several years ago when they said as much in an opinion. This time they said, we told you so, we were going to do this, and we did it. For same-sex marriage, I think Justice Kennedy, was very cognizant and perhaps wary of a backlash should he followed his constitutional convictions, which I think he was expressed at oral argument, to extend same-sex marriage across the country. So instead, what he did is he pulled back. He relied on a states' rights argument that was kind of fused with the other 4 liberals who joined him in the DOMA case with an equal protection argument, and created a kind of legal mishmash of rationale to ultimately create a decision that was quite good for gays and lesbians in America.
Maria, what do you think?
I think that's right. And if I could add, I'm sorry, if I could add really quickly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she said in the Roe v. Wade decision that it went too far, too fast. So I think you saw that there was, some agreement that a decision with such huge social ramifications that is so intense and so emotional perhaps should be more incremental.
I thought it was interesting that that the Chief Justice actually said that Congress can still impose federal oversight on the states that still have voting rights at risk. That he's admitting that this is still an issue. But I do agree that they were actually basically scolding Congress for not having done what they should and are punting it. And so now I agree with President Obama. Congress should do this because there are still abuses when it comes to voting rights. And we saw it just this past election.
Okay, Maria Cardona, Amy Holmes, Mike Sachs, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.